A secured warehouse, dozens of surveillance cameras, electronic access doors, and one-night watchman. On paper, it should have been impossible for anyone to enter or leave unnoticed. Yet on November 12th, a 41-year-old security guard named Dennis Kramer vanished during his shift, simply disappeared. The cameras captured him at 3:11 a.m. 1 minute later, he was gone. But what investigators later discovered in the footage made the case even more disturbing. This is the story of the night watchman who vanished. Dennis Kramer had worked security for more than 8 years. According to his co-workers, he was reliable, calm, and rarely called in sick. The warehouse he guarded, known as Warehouse 17, sat on the edge of an industrial district. During the day, trucks came and went constantly. At night, however, the property became eerily quiet. Most shifts were uneventful. Dennis would perform routine patrols, check surveillance monitors, and file reports. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. At least, that's what everyone believed. On the evening of November 12th, Dennis arrived for work just before midnight. Security logs confirmed he entered the building at 11:52 p.m. His shift began normally. At 1 a.m., he completed his first patrol. At 2 a.m., he completed another. Everything appeared routine. At exactly 3 a.m., Dennis radioed the control center. "All clear?" "Nothing to report." Those would be the last confirmed words anyone ever heard from him. 11 minutes later, security camera 12 recorded Dennis walking down a side corridor on the eastern side of the warehouse. Investigators later reviewed the footage countless times. There was nothing obviously strange about it. Dennis appeared calm. He wasn't running. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He simply walked down the hallway as he had hundreds of times before. Normally, he would have appeared on camera 13 just a few seconds later. But he didn't. Camera 13 showed an empty hallway. Camera 14 showed nothing. Camera 15 showed nothing. It was as if Dennis had simply ceased to exist between two cameras. At first, nobody noticed. The control center assumed he was continuing his patrol. But when Dennis failed to respond to a routine radio check at 4 a.m., concerns began to grow. Several more attempts were made. No answer. At 4:20 a.m., a supervisor drove to the warehouse. Dennis's car was still parked outside. His personal phone was sitting on his desk. His keys were inside the building. But Dennis himself was nowhere to be found. Police arrived shortly afterward. Their first assumption was that Dennis had somehow left the property. But that theory quickly fell apart. Every entrance and exit was monitored. No footage showed him leaving. No doors had been opened. No alarms had been triggered. Investigators spent days searching the warehouse. Every room, every storage area, every loading dock. Nothing. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. As the investigation expanded, detectives began examining Dennis's personal life. They looked into his finances, his family, his friendships, his work history. But they found nothing suspicious. Dennis had no known enemies, no major debts, no history of mental health issues, and no apparent reason to disappear voluntarily. The case quickly became one of the strangest missing person investigations in the region. Weeks passed, then months. Still no answers. Eventually, investigators returned to the surveillance footage. This time, they weren't looking for Dennis. They were looking for details they might have missed, and that's when one detective noticed something unusual. Just before Dennis entered the side corridor, he appeared to glance toward the far end of the hallway. At first, it seemed insignificant, but the more they watched, the stranger it looked. Dennis wasn't casually looking around. He seemed focused on something, or someone, something beyond the camera's field of view. Whatever he was looking at, it appeared to catch his attention immediately. Yet the hallway looked completely empty, at least on camera. The discovery raised new questions. Had Dennis seen someone? Had someone been hiding just outside the camera's range? Police conducted another detailed search of the warehouse. This time, they focused on the area surrounding the corridor. What they discovered surprised everyone. Behind a large storage rack was a concealed access panel. The panel led to a small, hidden room. Even more surprising, the room did not appear on any official building plans. Someone had created it years earlier. Inside, investigators found old tools, abandoned equipment, and stacks of dusty documents. The room appeared to have been used regularly at some point in the past. But by whom? No one knew. Then detectives found something that would change the entire direction of the case. A small notebook. The notebook contained dozens of names. Each name was followed by a date and a time. Nobody knew what the list meant. Some entries were decades old. Others were more recent. Investigators began researching the names. Several belonged to former employees. Others belonged to people who had once visited the property. And then they reached the final page. At the bottom was a single entry: Dennis Kramer. The date next to his name matched the night he disappeared. The room instantly became the center of the investigation. Who wrote the names? Why was Dennis listed? And how long had the notebook been hidden there? Despite months of forensic analysis, no definitive answers emerged. Fingerprints were either too old or unusable. DNA evidence led nowhere. The mystery only deepened. Then, nearly a year later, investigators made another discovery. A forgotten backup server was located in an off-site storage facility. The server contained archived surveillance footage nobody realized still existed. Among the files was an 8-second video clip recorded on the night Dennis vanished. The footage showed the same corridor. Dennis stood alone. At first, everything appeared normal, then something changed. Dennis suddenly froze. He stared at something off-screen. His posture became tense. He took one step backward, then another, as if he had seen something alarming. For several seconds, he remained motionless. Then, unexpectedly, he turned and began running. But not away from whatever he had seen. He was running toward it. The footage ended abruptly. No further recordings existed. Investigators were stunned. The video raised more questions than it answered. Why would Dennis run toward something that appeared to frighten him? What had he seen? And why did the recording stop at that exact moment? To this day, Dennis Kramer has never been found. No arrests have ever been made, and no suspect has ever been officially identified. But one final detail continues to haunt the investigators who worked the case. While enhancing the last video clip, analysts noticed a faint reflection in the surface of a metal cabinet. A reflection that appeared for less than a second. The image was blurry, distorted, almost impossible to see, but according to multiple experts, it showed the outline of another person, someone standing at the far end of the corridor, someone who was never supposed to be there. The image quality was too poor for identification. No face could be recovered. No useful features could be extracted. Yet investigators agreed on one thing. Dennis was not alone that night, and perhaps that is why this case remains unsolved. Because the most important question isn't where Dennis Kramer went. The most important question is, who was waiting for him at the end of that hallway? And why has nobody ever discovered their identity?